Before I start weaving, I like to put the finish on the frame of the chair. We're using the reed wet or damp, and so it's going to be touching all different parts of this chair. And so if I had just sanded it or prepared it for finish, then I'd have to worry about going back and touching up all those places that might have gotten wet. It also is a lot easier to finish the frame without the weaving in it. And it's not too hard to finish just the weaving because for the most part, I like to use an oil or an oil wax blend. And so if I get a little bit of finish on the bits and pieces of the frame around the weaving, it's easy to just kind of buff it off really quick as I'm applying it. The next thing you're going to need is some reed. And there are a lot of different choices out there. You can get smoked reed like I'm using here today, and this is great because it looks a lot like hickory bark from a distance, and if you put a little bit of gloss in your finish, you get a really nice looking seat. The other one that I really like is this lighter natural color. This is available in a lot of different grades. If you're gonna use the natural, it's worth spending the money to get the premium because you'll have a lot less work prepping it for finish. And if you look a little bit outside of the traditional basket supplies, you can find that premium reed that's been dyed a whole rainbow of colors. So there's a lot of choices when it comes to flat reed. I always like to start with a couple of coils. Each of these coils is a pound. We're going to need some galvanized wire. This is 26 gauge steel. We use this to hold the splices together as we're weaving the chair. We're going from one strip to the next. So I will take a pair of side cutters or diagonal cutters, and I'll cut maybe a dozen little sections of this that are 6 or 8 inches long, and I'll have them all cut and ready to go. I don't have to stop and do that while I'm weaving. And then you also are going to need some foam to go between the layers of the reed. It's an inch thick. The foam that I'm using right now is about the second hardest. It's not the hardest foam. It has a little bit of give. But you don't want something that's so soft it's kind of like it's not even there. So we use quite a few tools to do the weaving, but none of them are very specialized. We need a straight edge to help us lay out and measure for our foam for the seat filler. We're going to need a piece of 1/4 inch plywood to act as a cutting board as we cut our tapers. This one is about 4 inches wide, it's about 20 inches long. You just want it to make sure that it can reach front to back without any trouble. And you don't want it to be too wide so it's in your way all the time. We're going to cut all those little tapers with a sharp utility knife. Doesn't have to be anything special. As we weave, we're going to need to splice those sections of reed together. So we use that galvanized wire, and we're going to twist those together with a simple pair of pliers and cut the extra off with some side cutters. We can cut the reed to length with that utility knife and the cutting board, or we can just use a pair of scissors. I like the scissors. And then as we weave, these little squeeze clamps come in handy to keep the tension as we're working. You need at least one of these while you're working. Early on, it's nice to have 2, but you don't have to. You also need a good surface to work on. What I have here is just a piece of MDF that's 11 inches wide. I've got it clamped to my bench, and then I've got like an old dish towel shrink wrapped onto it. The towel isn't necessary if you're using an unfinished frame, but since I've got some finish on this, I thought I'd give it a little extra protection. This is nice because it allows you to turn the chair over, and it keeps everything at about the same height. You can also work off of a lower platform, something maybe 24 inches high. Just be aware that when you flip the chair over, if it's an armchair, it'll rest on that platform just fine and you'll be able to work at a reasonable height. But if it's a side chair, it's going to drop down. So this particular setup works well for side chairs or armchairs. It keeps everything within 6 inches of the same height the entire time. I'm a big fan of this setup. So we're going to cut the foam blank up for the seat. Before we do that, it's a good idea to drop 1 coil of your reed into the water. We want to let it soak for 20 minutes before we can start working with it. And what I usually do is soak it for 10 minutes on one side, flip it over, and soak it for 10 minutes on the other side. Okay, before we do any weaving, we want to measure and cut our foam for our seat to the right size. Put a straight edge across the front and the back and get a measurement for the depth of the seat between the posts. And I got 13 3/4. So what I don't want to do is cut the foam to exactly that measurement. We need to trim a little extra off of each end because there's going to be a little bit of visibility between the strips of the reed. If you make it exactly the right width, you're going to see it out on the edges. So what I do is I take that 13 3/4 measurement and I subtract an inch off of it. So we're going to get 12 3/4 from front to back. Okay, so now we have our dimension from front to back, and we're inset about a 1/2 inch from the inside of the post on front and back. Now we need to figure out the trapezoidal shape. So we want to start from the center and measure halfway out on either side. This is 19.5 inches between the two front posts. I want to subtract an inch off of that. I get 18.5, and then I want to divide that in half and get 9 1/4 from the center line out in either direction. And if I check my work, I should get 18.5, and I do. Okay, here at the back, we've got 13.5. We then want to subtract an inch off of that. We get 12.5. Divide that in half. We get 6 1/4. And I should have 12.5. Connect my lines here. Okay, we've got our blank now. All we need to do is trim the corners off. So we're going to come in maybe 1.5 inches. All right, we got our blank. And again, the reason for trimming everything in from the corners is we don't want it to be visible after the seat is woven. So here in the corners, you have you've got two straight lines intersecting as they come off of each post, and there's a space in there where you can see through the opening. So trimming the corners makes sure that you don't see the foam after the chair seat is woven. All right, so I've got my reed soaking. It's almost ready to come out. Before I start wrapping the warp around here, I want to figure out how much to taper it. So I've got a strand of reed that's about 3/4 wide at the front, but I don't know how wide it should be at the back. I want to have an even number of strands at the front and the back. So I want to taper them all evenly. If I take the measurement at the back and divide it by the measurement between the legs at the front, I get the percentage of width that I need here at the back. So with my measurements here, I get a difference of about 0.7, which means the width of the strand at the back should be about 70% of the width at the front. And so if I multiply that by my 3/4 inch width strand, I get just over 1/2 inch. So when I'm cutting my tapers, I want to be trying to eyeballing 1/2 inch at the back to full width at the front. Okay, now that we've done our math and we know how much we want to taper, there's another thing we can do to help make sure we keep everything even across the front and the back, and that is to give ourselves some guideposts to work to. So we said that this measurement here was 19.5. Half of that is 9 3/4. So I'm going to mark 9 3/4 on the inside of the rung, the top rung here. I got 9 3/4 from the other side. Okay, so that's halfway. And I'm also I'm going to divide that in half again. So that's 4.5 plus 3/8 is 4 7/8. And if I check my work, I should have the same here. Yep, 4 7/8. Okay, so now I have roughly quarters that I can work towards. I'm going to do the same thing on the back. So we said that this was 13 3/4. That's 6.5 plus 3/8. That's 6 7/8. Check my work here. Okay, half of 6 7/8 is 3 7/16. Okay, so now as we weave, if we're going to have an even number of strands at front and an even number of strands at the back, we can be comparing. This is 1/4 of the way across, that's 1/4 of the way across. As I work my way over, I should be landing an even fraction between one and the other. All right, you got everything you need let's get started with the weaving.